Hi, I picked up this Atari 2600 Junior just before Christmas, hoping to enjoy the retro nostalgia over the festive period, but due to a turkey brining ice cube incident, I was somewhat put out of action. So months on a shelf later, I'm going to try my first Atari 2600 Composite mod. So here it is, the Atari 2600 Junior. Released in 1986, around the same time as the Atari 7800, both of which were delayed due to the video game crash in the US. It was positioned as a cheap entry-level gaming system, and as advertised, the fun is back. It was definitely aimed at trying to kick-start the industry again, selling for under $50. Both the 2600 Junior and the 7800 share a lot of the same design. The Junior itself came in a few different versions, the main ones being Large Rainbow, Short Rainbow, and the All Black, which is the one I have here. It's a PAL version and was only sold in Ireland. So unsurprisingly, due to them being notorious for having failing power supplies, the original isn't working. As you can see, nothing. I have a feeling that it may just be a break in the cable, as I did get something when moving it around, but even if I did find where that was, there'll probably be another issue. So I'm just going to use a new multi-adapter set to 9 volts, making sure the tip of the jack is set positive. So to take it apart, there are 4 screws around the edges. Then before it actually comes apart, there are 3 clips on the front grille. And these can be really brittle, so be careful and try and unclip them with a screwdriver. The next thing before we take it apart is there's a ribbon cable that connects the select and the reset buttons. Like any bad Catholic, it just pulls out. And here's the board. It's amazing how spaced out everything is. I'm also a bit surprised there's no RF shield on this. I'm not sure if it has been previously taken apart, but if it has, it's definitely been a while ago. So a quick look at the chips. We have the TIA, or Television Interface Adapter. This generated the image on the screen, as well as some sound effects and a few input controls. The MOS 6507. This was the 8-bit microprocessor. And the Riot chip, which brought RAM, I/O, and a programmable timer. Before I start anything, I'm just going to give it a quick clean with some IPA to make it a bit nicer to work with. I'm using a toothbrush. Going to give it a good old scrub. I'm also dripping some into the switches and moving it around to clean up the contacts. And after that, I went back over it with a cotton bud dipped in IPA just to clean up the places I could still see some dirt. My original plan for this was trying to find a mod that would leave the RF modulator in place so I could use both if I wanted to. But I couldn't really find a solution that would work for this revision board, and the whole reason I'm doing the mod is I'm not going to use it over RF. So for the mod I'm doing, I'm going to need to remove this RF modulator, this inductor, a transistor, and a resistor. So starting with the biggest, the RF modulator. So I'm just going to add some flux. I haven't got one of those modern flux pens. I've actually had this stuff for years, and it does the job, you just got to make sure it's cleaned up afterwards. There's quite a lot holding this in. There's firstly 4 large tabs holding the shield on, and then there's 4 pins that actually connect it. Using some new solder to help the old stuff melt, I'm just going to try and remove as much as I can using this desolder gun. Now just repeat that for all of them. Now, any of the rest that still look like the solder in there, I'm just going to try and get the rest with this solder wick. Also, some of the tabs on the modulator shield need a small turn just to help them out. With the modulator out, it's still connected via a small cable to the connector, so that's what I'll remove next. And I just did that in the same way. So next is the inductor. Then the transistor. And finally the resistor. There are a lot of kits online to mod an Atari, which make it a lot easier and probably cheaper than making your own, especially if you have to take into account buying all the components separately. So, I decided to make my own. I'm making a simple amplifier circuit, and as you can see there's not much to it, plus I had most of the components lying around, and for me it's part of the fun. So I'm just going to be making it on this strip board, but I'm also going to try and make it as small as possible. Hence why I've bent all the resistors up like this. As there's so much bare leads on the resistors, I'm just going to be putting on some heat shrink. So for the video signal, I'm taking it from the top of R56, the resistor I moved earlier. And for the plus 5 volts, from the bottom of the Q4 transistor that I also removed. For the ground, I'm going to use one of the leads I cut from one of the resistors earlier. And I'm hoping to use it as a way to connect it to the board, to stop it moving around. So I'm just going to solder it to one of the ground traces where the RF shield should have been. And now that that's in, I'm just going to quickly connect it to see if I'm getting a picture out. So instead of using actual composite connectors for this mod, I'm going to be using a 3.5mm jack. This is the TRRS one. That stands for tip, ring, and sleeve. And for the cable I have, that means the sleeve's ground, ring 2 is for video, and ring 1 and the tip are for the left and right audio channels. Success! There's a picture. Although it's hard to tell from this shoddy filming. The picture's not bad, but there's a bit of blurring around the sprites, and I think there's a bit of noise in there too. Because once I got it apart, I'm also going to replace the voltage regulator and the 2 electrolytic capacitors. As the pointer fell, and they may improve the picture. Also, this voltage regulator looks a bit sus, as it's not bolted down like I expected. But when testing it, it did seem to give out the right voltages. So starting with that, I'll just remove it in the same way. As you can see, I've not put any thermal paste on there, which would have been a perfect time as it fits so snugly, but at the moment I can't find it, so when I do, I'll definitely put some under. And I'll just give it a quick test after that. You might be thinking the image is a lot worse than it was before, but at the moment it's actually going through a HDMI adapter, which is washing it out quite a bit. That and black and white was actually turned on. Although the picture does look a bit crisper when it is in black and white. So it still works, there's no real change there. So now I'm going to replace the 2200 microfarad capacitor. As you can see, the one I'm replacing it with is not only smaller, but it's also a radial capacitor, whereas the one that's coming out is an axial. It also has a higher voltage rating, which, as long as it's higher, it doesn't matter. So my plan to make this fit is to essentially run the lead of the negative leg across the top of the board. And as the leg's exposed, I'll also put some heat shrink on this. And a quick test again. I think it's about the same, but at least it's still working. So the last capacitor I'm replacing is over on this half of the board. And just like the last one, the replacement's also radial, so I'm just going to stretch the legs. And test again, and it still looks the same. Okay, my last attempt now. I'm just going to change my original design a little bit and add a bypass capacitor just to help reduce some of the noise. I'm just adding a 100 nanofarad capacitor between the power and the ground. Neatness has gone out the window at this point, as I've decided not to remake it. I'm just going to add it to the original one. I also then connected the audio, which hopefully is the easy part, as I can get it from just connecting to the base of this resistor. Then just trying to neaten the wires. As the 2600 only had one channel of audio, to save it coming out of just one speaker on the TV, I'm just going to solder it to both the left and the right, so hopefully it'll just be the same coming out of both speakers. Now, for lack of coming up with any neater options, I'm just going to use hot glue to put the jack in place. I think it'll be strong enough, and I don't really want it moving around when I'm plugging things in and out. Also, I finally found my thermal paste, which annoyingly was just sitting behind me the entire time. And then I just bolted it down. So now, just reassemble it all and try some games. I played around with the colour pot for a bit, and I thought this was quite close, but looking back at the recording, I think there's a lot more noise in the green and blues than I actually saw in real life. I think this can be improved by tweaking it a little, and luckily you can get to it through the base of the case, so there's no need to open it up again. Also, after connecting it all back up, I realised the fire button on my controller doesn't work, so at the moment you can only move around, so I'll have to get round to fixing that at some point. But luckily, I can still play Pac-Man, even if it is the 2600 version. There it is, my first 2600 mod. I'm quite pleased how it turned out, and if I had a working controller, it would definitely make it a lot easier to play on the TV. I still might tweak the colours a bit, and if I do think of anything to improve the signal, I'll no doubt open it back up and have another go. And if you've got any suggestions, just drop them in the comments. Or if you know of any games I should check out, let me know. And if you're new and you like the video, hit subscribe. Thanks for watching.